In the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, monster power is mapped by levels on a sliding scale. Once you get above level 5, high-level monsters start requiring a tribute to normal summon, and after 7, they require 2. Level 8s are a common threshold for monsters we'd consider bosses, like Blue Eyes White Dragon, Galaxy Eyes Photon Dragon, Valkyrion the Magna Warrior, and a bunch more. But not all level 8s are as good as their levels imply. Actually, a lot of them are quite bad, which is where this list comes in. And charging into the number 10 spot to get this list of bad cards started off is Javelin Beetle. This is a level 8 Earth Insect with 2450 attack and 2550 defense. First hefting its way into the TCG as part of 2007's Premium Pack 1, Javelin Beetle has been around the OCG since back in 2000. Although 2450 attack is a decently usable total, it falls short of being remarkable for effectiveless level 8s. This includes the 3000 attack Blue Eyes White Dragon and Blackluster Soldier at the highest end, but also plenty of other creatures that beat the Beetle, like Trihorn Dragon, Cosmo Queen, and Gogagagagagigo. But unlike most other forgotten level 8s, Javelin Beetle is a ritual monster, which means it can't even be summoned without its companion ritual spell, Javelin Beetle Pack. Even worse, Javelin Beetle at the time of writing is the only ritual insect, and lacks the support given to older rituals. Blackluster Soldier has enjoyed both monster and spell trap support with cards like Beginning Night, Evening Twilight Night, Beginning of Heaven and Earth, and Gateway to Chaos. Even the other less anime important old school rituals like Skull Guardian and Hungry Hamburger inspired spin-off archetypes which keep their spirit alive. Maybe Javelin Beetle's day will come, but until then it's a level 8 that can't be summoned under normal conditions, and can only be brought out by searching another specific name from deck and then paying a high tribute cost. While it does enjoy the presence of generic ritual support like Choju of the Trillion Hands, Manju of the 10,000 Hands, and Senju of the 1,000 Hands, that's not enough to save Javelin Beetle from this list by a wide mile. Its best case use would probably be alongside Blackluster Soldier in a deck that runs a generic ritual spell Earth Chant that can summon them both. And even then, you'd probably just use Javelin Beetle as a convenient tribute cost that can be searched by the same cards that fetch the monsters you'll actually be summoning. Maybe this could have had some use in GOAT format, but unfortunately, despite existing in the OCG since 2000, Javelin Beetle's late 2007 printing in the TCG locks it out of the one format that might have tolerated its abysmal blend of unhelpful characteristics. Javelin Beetle does have 2 big anime appearances to its name. In episode 43 of the Duel Monsters anime, this card is briefly seen on display at a shop in the desert town Yugioh Mokuba Cross while searching for Kaiba in his own video game. Instead of firing the Big Five after they aligned with Pegasus, committing several personal crimes against the Kaiba family as part of their hostile takeover of Kaiba Corp, Anime Seto immediately fell into an obvious trap where his corporate lackeys trapped him in cyberspace. Javelin Beetle would again be seen on display in another shop in episode 55, this time as a generic stock in the rare Hunter-run store that first gave our heroes their dual discs. Okay, so Javelin Beetle's anime appearances weren't actually that big, basically inconsequential, actually, but it still had them and the monster needs all the love it can get because it's not going anywhere. Still, Javelin Beetle only takes number 10 on this list on account of its generic ritual support. It's not good, but it is searchable a bunch of different ways and can work with cards like Jin Presider of Rituals and Jin Curse Chanter of Rituals. Maybe someday we'll talk about it again after Konami prints a super busted Ritual Insect Legacy archetype. But until then, Javelin Beetle holds it down at number 10. With the advent of Synchro Summoning in 2008, the extra deck got a lot more accessible, allowing generic tuners to turn other monsters into valid materials to special summon bosses that were way more convenient than previous fusion monsters, which required specific names and a polymerization spell or substitute. Chaos Goddess, a level 8 light fairy synchro with 2500 attack and 1800 defense, undid all of this convenience by requiring 1 light tuner and 2 dark non-tuner materials to synchro summon. She released as part of the Shining Darkness set in 2010, and would be mostly competitively ignored until landing number 9 on this list over a decade later. Chaos Goddess was the first synchro monster to have attribute locks on its materials, and since she also requires 3 materials instead of the standard 2, she was incredibly inconvenient to get onto the field. Even in Chaos decks that worked well with Fiends and Fairies of Light and Dark, her summoning restrictions made her both too difficult and pricey to play. Her effect to revive a level 5 or higher dark monster from your grave once per turn at the cost of discarding a light monster was already clunky, and the chance you'd find yourself in a game state where you could both summon Chaos Goddess and benefit from her effect was and remains vanishingly small. but it's good to revive monsters and chaos strategies like a bustling graveyard, so she'll keep a spot at the lower end of this list. While Chaos Goddess was mostly ignored in the competitive context, she does have quite a lot of fans on account of her gorgeous card art, and is a common choice for cosplayers, which is pretty cool. Her thematic blending of light and darkness is reflected in her attire and her shining skull scepter, and in the swirling black and white background behind her, where lurks a ferocious white wolf and a sinister dark fiend. Storming the number 8 spot is the E-Hero fusion from 2005's Elemental Energy set, Elemental Hero Tempest. This level 8 Wind Warrior is a fusion of Elemental Hero Bubbleman, Elemental Hero Sparkman, and Elemental Hero Avian, and it has 2800 attack and defense. And while that number might be high enough to let Tempest smite the Javelin Beetle, it's not a number a level 8 can truly be proud of. Still, Elemental Hero Tempest had a few big... Elemental Hero Tempest can send another card you control to the graveyard to confer battle immunity to another one of your monsters, with that protection lasting for as long as Tempest remains face up on the field. There's no limit on the amount of times you can activate this effect, so if you want to make all of your monsters safe from battle at the high cost of sending a bunch of cards from the field to the grave, you can definitely do that. Of course, battle is one of the slowest and riskiest ways to pick apart your opponent's field, and there are so many easier ways to get rid of Elemental Hero Tempest plus any card it might protect, like Dark Hole, Maneater Bug, Sakuretsu Armor, and even Trap Hole. Those are just cards that are older than Tempest, and the game has not gotten friendlier since 2005. It doesn't help that once Tempest is gone, it's not coming back, since it must be fusion summoned and cannot be called up by other ways. A Tempest in the graveyard remains in the graveyard. All the Monster Reborns and Call the Haunteds in the worlds are not going to change that. But it's not like Elemental Hero Tempest is doing too much harm by occupying the 15th extra deck slot, right? Well, it's more about the materials. Tempest requires 3 specific names, and none of them are good. Elemental Heroes are an important archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! History and have brought some incredible, memorable, and powerful cards, like Elemental Hero Sunrise, Stratos, and even Brave Neos, if we're talking about Duel Links. But they don't start that way. Most of the original lineup of main deck heroes used by Jaded Yuki in the anime have been largely ignored, and for good reason. They're a mix of monsters with forgettable stats and effects when they have effects at all, and Tempest forces you to dedicate at least 3 main deck slots to its materials, and those spots could go to almost anything else in your deck would get better. Elemental Hero Tempest would appear many times throughout the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime, but its introduction came in episode 11 during the tag duel, where Team Jaden and Cyrus took on the former Duelist Kingdom Eliminators Para and Dox. In some ways, Elemental Hero Tempest is a reflection of Gate Guardian. While Gate Guardian isn't a fusion like Tempest, or it wasn't at the time, it is a warrior monster comprised of 3 elemental materials that gives it power of water, thunder, and wind, which is the same of the 3 elemental heroes of Tempest, Bubbleman, Sparkman, and Avian. Eventually, the tag duel would be decided by Cyrus Truedel's activation of Power Bond, fusing Tempest with UFO-Roid to summon a supercharged UFO-Roid fighter, whose card art features Tempest as a visual callback to this important moment from early GX. Cutting in to take the number 7 spot is the level 8 Light Warrior with shimmering gold armor, Mirage Knight. A super rare from 2003's Dark Crisis set, Mirage Knight has 2800 attack, 2000 defense, and predictably no competitive placements in the over 20 years that it's existed in the game. 2800 attack is fine for a level 8, but Mirage Knight's got some cool tricks to pull during damage calculation. When it battles, Mirage Knight gains attack points equal to the original attack of its combatant. That's pretty epic. So why is Mirage Knight even here? Well, like its namesake, Mirage Knight is a fleeting presence, destined to disappear into the banished zone during the end phase of the turn in which it participated in battle. It also can't be summoned by traditional means. Instead of tributing or finding some other way to cheat it out, you'll have to use Dark Flare Knight, a fusion monster that takes Dark Magician and Flame Swordsman as its materials. Despite being partially derived from Dark Magician, Dark Flare Knight is weaker than its materials, with only 6 levels and 2200 attack points. On the brighter side, Dark Flare Knight takes no battle damage, which is useful because its effect to summon Mirage Knight can only trigger when Dark Flare Knight is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard. After that happens, Mirage Knight can be brought out from your hand or deck, but that's already way too convoluted to reliably pull off. Dark Flare Knight and Mirage Knight 2 are the same kind of redundant as Elemental Hero Tempest, in that they are both over-focused on the mechanic of battling. Like with Tempest, Dark Flare Knight can be safely removed in 1,000 different non-battle ways. Dark Hole, Maneater Bug, and Sakuretsu Armor are easy outs for Tempest that we already mentioned. So let's expand this list. Try Soul Exchange in any high-level monster. or Dark Whore, or Divine Knight as Shark. And that's given that Dark Flare Knight even managed to hit the field, which is already difficult since it's a fusion of a fusion. If you want to summon Mirage Knight without shortcuts, you'll need Flame Manipulator, Misaki the Legendary Swordsman, 2 Polymerizations, Dark Magician, Dark Flare Knight, and a 2200 plus monster sitting unprotected in attack mode on your opponent's side of the field. Even if you do the normal thing and cheat Dark Flare Knight out with a fusion substitute monster like King of the Swamp or Mystical Sheep #1, or by taking advantage of the GOAT format ban list so you can play Metamorphosis to skip the polymerization process altogether, but even streamlined, summoning Mirage Knight by way of Dark Flare Knight is a lot of work, and that Mirage Knight will be taking up vital space in your main deck the entire time. The 2024 set Maze and Millennia brought quite a few retrains of cards from the Duelist Kingdom anime that fell victim to the game's unwieldy early days of card design, including many cards used by the Paradox Brothers, and an entire archetype revolving around Flame Swordsman. This line of cards included new tools that are able to bring out Dark Flare Knight, like Flame Sword Dance and Mirage Swordsman, itself a retrain of Mirage Knight. But despite this, Mirage Knight still hasn't seen competitive play, and likely won't. It's still a dead draw that's difficult to use. Mirage Knight's one anime appearance comes in episode 113 of the Duel Monsters anime, during the virtual world showdown between the team of Joey and Yugi versus the souls of the Kaiba Corp Big Five, all twinned up in Tristan Taylor's body. At the time, Tristan's stranded consciousness had been co-signed to the Acrobat Monkey, giving a little extra anime flavor to another otherwise unremarkable normal monster. Back to Yugi, Joey, Mirage Knight. Like when they summoned Black Skull Dragon against the Paradox Brothers by fusing Summon Skull with Red Eyes Black Dragon, Yugi and Joey combined 2 of their ace monsters into Dark Flare Knight. But this was actually an even bigger fusion than Black Skull Dragon. Duels in Noah Kaiba's virtual world operate by Deckmaster rules, where a duelist would select a monster to serve as their Deckmaster. This would come with a special power similar to dueling skills, and the ability to commit your Deckmaster to the field at any moment, with this advantage offset by the risk of instantly losing the duel if your Deckmaster is destroyed. Yugi and Joey pushed the bounds of the format by fusing their Deckmasters, Dark Magician and Flame Swordsman. The resulting Dark Flare Knight shared the role of Deckmaster between the two of them, meaning if it was removed from the field, they'd both lose the duel and their bodies. Luckily, the role of Deckmaster was a little fluid in the anime, and when Dark Flare Knight floated into Mirage Knight after being destroyed by Five-Headed Dragon, Mirage Knight became their new shared Deckmaster. Thanks to its powerful battle phase effect, Mirage Knight was able to slay the multi-headed beast, and in a departure from its TCG effect, returned Dark Magician and Flame Swordsman to the field after it banished itself. This was good because the Big Five had chained Five-Headed Dragon's destruction with a deal with the Dark Ruler to summon Berserk Dragon, making it their new Deckmaster. This duel of Deckmaster shenanigans would finally end after Joey used Flame Swordsman's Deckmaster ability to empower Dark Magician with enough points to slay the final Mad Dragon. And while we're on the subject of hard to use but cool dragons, bursting onto this list's number 6 spot is the level 8 Light Dragon Fusion, Tyrant Burst Dragon. Entering the TCG as part of Dragons of Legends 2 in 2015, Tyrant Burst Dragon has 2900 attack and 2500 defense. A stat line it shares with Tyrant Dragon, another level 8 light monster. The reason for this resemblance comes from the trap Tyrant Wing, which transfers Tyrant Dragon's multi-attack effect by equipping it onto another dragon monster. Tyrant Burst Dragon is a bizarre kind of fusion in that it can't be summoned by polymerization or any traditional means. Instead, it requires a spell card, the Fang of Critias, which can send a specific trap from your hand or field to the graveyard to summon specific fusion monsters. By sending Mirror Force to the grave through the Fang of Critias, you can summon Mirror Force Dragon. Crush Card Virus yields Doom Virus Dragon. By sending Ring of Destruction, you can bring out Destruction Dragon, and it is same for Tyrant Burst Dragon by sending Tyrant Wing. On the field, Tyrant Burst Dragon is able to attack all of your opponent's monsters once each. But that's not all. Like its progenitor Trap, Tyrant Burst Dragon can equip to a monster you control, giving it plus 400 attack and defense as well as extra attacks during the battle phase. Unlike the original Tyrant Wing, there are no downsides of being equipped with Tyrant Burst Dragon. During the end phase of the turn when a monster is equipped with Tyrant Wing attack, the monster is destroyed, but during the end phase of a turn where a monster equipped with Tyrant Burst Dragon attacked, nothing happens. You can just enjoy the devastation wrought on your opponent's board. So if Tyrant Burst Dragon is actually fine, what's it doing on this list? Well, that loops back around to its summoning conditions. The Fang of Critias is a normal spell that is difficult to search, and while there are methods of searching normal traps and cards like Trap Tricks or Lilith, Lady of Lament, both require you to run multiple copies of your desired trap to attain any level of consistency. This isn't a big deal with Destruction Dragon or Mirror Force Dragon because those traps are at least usable. And no, Mirror Force and Ring of Destruction aren't the threats they used to be, but your opponent will still have to deal with them. And they're way better than Tyrant Wing, which was never good. Tyrant Burst Dragon's one anime appearance comes from episode 167 of the Duel Monsters anime during Seto Kaiba's second duel against Alistair, one of the writers of the Orichalcos. For Kaiba, the stakes of this duel had never been higher. Quite literally, since the showdown took place on a haywire Kaiba Court plane. With Mokuba on board and this Silver Orichalcos messing with the autopilot function, Alistair intended to ruin the Kaiba brothers regardless of the duel's outcome. If he claimed Kaiba's soul for the Great Leviathan by winning, all the better. But a plane crash would satisfy his desire for revenge just fine. Before Seto took over his stepdad's company, Gozaburo Kaiba had made his fortune by manufacturing weapons that were used to destroy many cities and homes, including young Alistair's. Gozaburo might have been gone, but the Kaiba name remained, and Alistair's goal was to correct that. However, this would not come to pass, because the Kaiba Corp Air Force succeeded in rallying to save their president, while Seto won the duel with the Fang of Critias, using it to first summon Tyrant Burst Dragon, and then fusing Tyrant Burst Dragon with his Blue Eyes White Dragon to form the even more powerful Blue Eyes Tyrant Dragon. Fortunately, the TCG adaptation of Blue Eyes Tyrant Dragon doesn't need the Fang of Critias, Tyrant Burst Dragon, or even Tyrant Wing to bring out. Instead, it can be summoned through the simple fusion of a Blue Eyes White Dragon with another dragon. But as a nod to Tyrant Burst Dragon, Blue Eyes Tyrant Dragon can also be special summoned from the extra deck without polymerization by tributing a Blue Eyes White Dragon equipped with a fusion monster. But this entry isn't about Blue Eyes Tyrant Dragon, because that card's actually pretty good. This entry is about Tyrant Burst Dragon, the most forgettable form of Critias, and since there's nothing more to say, it's time to move on. Emerging from the shadows to claim number 5 is Vampire Genesis, the level 8 Dark Zombie with 3000 attack and 2100 defense, which was the cover card for the 2005 structure deck Zombie Madness. The Vampire line of cards has spawned a number of memorable, menacing creatures over the years. Among them, the likes of Vampire Vamp, Vampire Sucker, Dampier Vampire Sheridan, and even the Zombie Vampire. Not among them is the archetype's original boss, Vampire Genesis. It's got the pretty forgettable effect to discard a zombie monster and then revive a different zombie with a lower level than the sent card. Reviving cards is generally pretty good, but the cost of Vampire Genesis effect is too high to atone for the difficulty you run into in getting it on the field. Vampire Genesis can only be special summoned from the hand by banishing a Vampire Lord you control. And while Vampire Search and support cards like Vampire Bat and Vampire's Desires certainly makes this doable, it's still not something you'd really want to do. See, in some ways, Vampire Genesis is even worse than its specific tribute, Vampire Lord. A level 5 with 2000 attack and 1500 defense, Vampire Lord makes up for having lower numbers in Vampire Genesis by being way easier to play and better at staying on the field. While Vampire Genesis is almost impossible to bring out once it's gone, a Vampire Lord destroyed by an opponent's card effect will rise from the grave during your next standby phase. And then Vampire Genesis got crept even further by the 2007 release of Zombie Master, a low-level monster with no summoning restrictions, decent attack, and the ability to pretty much do the same thing as Vampire Genesis, but more than once per turn. But contrary to its dismissal showing in the TCG, Vampire Genesis was a scary presence in the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime. Used by Camilla, second to the Shadow Riders, its overpowering darkness combined with Camilla's wiles would consume her first two opponents, turning Dr. Valen Crowler and Zane Truesdale into cursed dolls. Jaden would ultimately break her win streak by destroying Vampire Genesis with his Elemental Hero Shining Flare Wingman. The hero's fusion effect to burn an opponent for an amount equal to the attack of the monster destroys by battle would prove catastrophic to Camilla, effectively turning Vampire Genesis' one real strength into a weakness. VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon's name contains the final 5 letters of the alphabet, and that's fitting because facing it on the field is the last thing your opponent will ever see. Or at least that's what Chaz Princeton would tell you. But would you really believe him? In actuality, this level 8 light machine fusion from the 2005 set Elemental Energy super fails to live up to the tremendous resource investment required to summon it. Not a decent stat line of 3000 attack and 2000 defense, or its effects on the field are enough to prevent VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon from chazzing it up at number 4. Although it's a fusion monster, Catapult Cannon is not summoned using polymerization or any other kind of fusion spell. Instead, it can be assembled by banishing its materials, XYZ-Dragon Cannon and VW Tiger Catapult, which are themselves fusion monsters, summoned by banishing their materials from the field, which are X-Head Cannon, Y-Dragon Head, and Z-Metal Tank for XYZ, and V-Tiger Jet plus W-Wing Catapult for VW. That brings the total cost of VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon up to 5 specific names from the main deck and 3 slots from your extra deck. Luckily, this is all quite easy to keep track of since the core materials you'll need for this combination boss are literally spelled out in its name. But what does VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon do on the field? Well, its weaker form, XYZ-Dragon Cannon, can discard 1 card to target and destroy 1 card, and VW-Tiger Catapult can discard 1 to change a monster's battle position. Sadly, Dragon Catapult Cannon is much less than the sums of its part, though it is able to target and banish a card at no cost in a powered-up version of XYZ-Dragon Cannon's effect. VWXYZ carries a once per turn limitation, ultimately capping its offensive potential way below the OG XYZ. At least it gets a bit of VW-Tiger Catapult's effect in that it's able to change the battle position of any monster it attacks, but that's also effectively limited to once per turn too, unless you dedicate even more cards to giving your VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon more attacks. On the bright side, this would be a great time to summon Tyrant Burst Dragon. Of course, if that's our bright side, then things are in fact pretty bleak. But it's not all bad. Years and years of support tying together all of Chaz Princeton's cards makes summoning VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon not totally awful, especially with Ojama Assimilation. Additionally, cards like Ojama Dahlin can help modern VWXYZ hopefuls go into Saryuja Skuldred, the king of silly combos. Other modern cards like XYZ Combined can help nullify the initial price tag of these expensive fusion machines. But ultimately, if you're going to plan on playing Light Machine Union fusions, you're better off playing ABC Dragon Buster, the XYZ-Dragon Cannon spin-off that's actually good, and can banish a card as a quick effect once per turn. You can even merge XYZ-Dragon Cannon with ABC Dragon Buster to bring out A to Z Dragon Buster Cannon. But if you're playing VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon, you're probably not looking to end on it, because it too can actually contact fuse with Armed Dragon level 7 to go into the Chaz Super Boss monster, Armed Dragon Catapult Cannon, which has the bogusly good effect of locking your opponent out of activating the effect of cards that share a name with already banished cards, while being able to banish a card from your deck or extra deck as cost to banish your opponent's whole field and graveyard as a quick effect. Now that is a powerful monster worth spending a lot of resources on. And it still doesn't see competitive play, because even it cannot redeem the enormous cost of going into VWXYZ and Armed Dragons. VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon is notable for being one of the first big bosses tackled by Jaden Yuki, showing up as early as episode 4 of the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime. Of course, even as a big giant machine, VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon still comes second, since Jaden already squared off against Dark Veil and Crowler's Ancient Gear Golem in episode 1. Chaz would use VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon 2 more times over the course of the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime, once against Adrian Gecko in episode 111, and a second time against an army of dual ghouls in episode 129. It would also put in a brief appearance in episode 106 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, but was quickly destroyed by Starving Venom Fusion Dragon with 13,000 attack. But forget Arc 5, because we're staying with GX era and going into the Elemental Energy set specifically for our next spot. Splashing down at number 3 is Water Dragon, a level 8 predictably water attribute sea serpent with 2800 attack and 2600 defense. Like so many other cards on this list, Water Dragon cannot be normal summoned or set, while being very particular about how and when it can be special summoned. Like with Tyrant Burst Dragon and Javelin Beetle, you'll need to draw or search a spell before Water Dragon can be brought out, and that spell is Bonding H2O. Like with Tyrant Burst Dragon and VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon and so many other struggling level 8s, Water Dragon is fine once you've done the work of getting it onto the field. Even better than fine. At the time that the script was written, Water Dragon is arguably at its highest level of power ever, given the prominence of fire attribute decks like Snake Eyes, Rescue Ace, and Fire Kings. Because while Water Dragon is on the field, the attack of all fire attribute and pyro-type monsters becomes 0, which is one way to stop yourself from taking lethal damage from a big mean board of fire bosses for as long as you can keep your Water Dragon protected. Still, even if Water Dragon is destroyed, it floats into its elemental components, special summoning 2 copies of Hydrogen Dawn and 1 copy of Oxygen Dawn from your graveyard. Of course, you'll need to assemble those 3 monsters on your board to even bring out Water Dragon in the first place, since the only effect of the spell Bonding H2O is to tribute both Hydrogen Dawn and Oxygen Dawn to move your Water Dragon from hand, deck, or graveyard to the field. There is a slightly easier way to summon Water Dragon, and that's by using the Bonding D2 spell instead, which contribute to Duotrions and Oxygendons from field or hand to special summon Water Dragon or Water Dragon Cluster from hand, deck, or graveyard. Water Dragon Cluster negates your opponent's monster effects and contributes itself to split into 2 Water Dragons, which is pretty cool. And it can also be brought out with the Bonding DHO trap. Despite the different ways its base elements can be combined, Water Dragon has seen no play because it's too slow, too bricky, and too specific in what it's trying to counter. Water Dragon Cluster might be able to negate all of your opponent's monsters and set their attacks to 0, but that's the only offensive tool this archetype carries from anything that's not a fire or pyro. But this hyper-specific design is part of why it was used by Bastion Misawa in the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime. A highly tactical mind, Bastion would devote a great deal of time to tailoring many counter decks to prepare himself for a strategy he might come against. In episode 12, he was able to reduce the attack of Chaz Princeton's Infernal Incinerator to 0 with a Water Dragon, and attack into it for a game. He'd go on to use Water Dragon twice against Jaden Yuki during 2 duels, where he'd lose both times and again during the Gen X tournament. Water Dragon would make its final GX appearance alongside VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon during the episode 129 Battle Royale between Jaden's crew and the Duel Ghouls. While Water Dragon did not make a splash in the TCG competitive scene, in Duel Links it also quietly sank beneath the waves. It did get a summoning animation when used by Bastion Misawa, but unfortunately Bastion is one of the most grueling duelist unlocks in the game, requiring you to win 50 duels with 3 or less cards remaining in your deck. Hope you have a good Lightsworn deck because the grind is not fun. Shaking the desk number 2 is the Great Moth. This level 8 Earth Insect from 2002's Metal Raider set has 2600 attack and 2500 defense, and was one of the first ace monsters faced by Yugi in the Duel Monsters anime. During his first match of the Duelist Kingdom tournament, Yugi challenged the regional champion Weevil Underwood to a duel. Before the start of the match, Weevil baited Yugi into giving chase until both duelists were deep in the forest, which, per the special rules of Duelist Kingdom, gave all of Weevil's bug monsters a field power bonus. After enveloping his Larva Moth in Cocoon of Evolution, Weevil spent a lot of time taunting Yugi about the strength of the creature that would emerge. And yes, the correct way to use Cocoon of Evolution is with Petite Moth and not Larva Moth. You'd think Weevil would know better, but then after considering his win-loss record, maybe this misplay kinda makes sense. Anyway, Weevil revealed the Great Moth in episode 5 after Yugi managed to destroy Cocoon of Evolution with Gaia the Fierce Knight. In the anime, Great Moth had the ability to weaken non-insect monsters with the choking dust that spun off its wings. This would prove not enough to overcome Yugi's summoned skull after the empowerment of Makiu the Magical Mist, and Weevil lost the duel. While the TCG adaptation of Great Moth has no effect outside of one of the harshest summoning conditions in the entire game, the spirit of Great Moth's impact in the anime would be preserved by another line of evolving bugs, the Ultimate Insects, which decrease the attack of an enemy monster by more and more with each level up. But back to Great Moth. It's landing all the way at the number 2, and let's talk about why. While 2600 isn't an embarrassing attack stat to hit the field with, the unfortunate reality of Great Moth is that it's just not going to hit the field. First, you'll need Petite Moth, a level 1 vanilla insect, and then you'll need a Cocoon of Evolution to equip it with. Then, what you need is time, and a lot of it, because Great Moth can only be special summoned from your hand by tributing a Cocoon of Evolution equipped Petite Moth during your 4th turn having it on the field. While most games of Yu-Gi-Oh! Are basically decided before turn 4, this is a really bleak way to summon. Also, if you draw Great Moth on your 5th turn, hosting the world's most inconvenient Poopa, you're out of luck. The closing of the 4th turn is also the closing of your window to summon Great Moth. But anime fans who've studied Weevil Underwood's frankly tragic career might ask, isn't there a stronger no-effect Moth that's arguably worse? Actually, no. Let's talk about perfectly ultimate Great Moth anyway. It's like Great Moth, except instead of waiting 4 turns, with Petite Moth and Cocoon of Evolution, you have to wait 6. To compensate for the extra weight, perfectly ultimate Great Moth has 900 more attack than the neutrally regular Great Moth, boasting a respectable stat line of 3500 attack and 3000 defense. Unlike Great Moth, perfectly ultimate can be summoned by tributing your Petite Moth on turn 6 or later. It doesn't lock itself out of hitting the field if you can't draw it in time, which is nice. But of course, no one is summoning either of these cards through Cocoon of Evolution anyway, making this positive modification mostly irrelevant. If you want to use the moths in the modern game, you're much better off just using Cocoon of Ultra Evolution, a quick play spell which can tribute an insect monster with equipment to hatch an insect from your deck while ignoring its summoning conditions. Since this effectively gives Great Moth and perfectly ultimate Great Moth the same practical summoning conditions, this list ranks Great Moth worse than its perfected form, since it has lower stats. A rumbling sound in the distance, big booming stomps and harsh clinks. This sound is the approach of Metalzoa, the #1 pick for worst level 8 of all time. It's a dark machine with 3000 attack and 2300 defense. And despite appearing in the artwork of the spell Heavy Metal Raiders, Metalzoa did not release with the Metal Raiders set, instead entering the TCG as a promo exclusive in Prismatic Rare with copies of The False-Bound Kingdom for the Nintendo GameCube. With a brief appearance in the World Championship 2011 card pack, Metalzoa would finally release widely as part of Legendary Collection 4, Joey's World in 2013. Of course, no one played it because it was very, very bad. And that's why we're talking about it here. Similar to Great Moth, Metalzoa has no effect on the field. Instead, it devotes all of its card text to detailing how it can be summoned. It's actually one of the very few monsters that can special summon itself from the deck, a distinction it shares with its companion card, Red Eye's Black Metal Dragon. After equipping Zoa, a level 7 normal fiend with Metal Morph, Metalzoa can special summon itself from the deck by tributing the Metal Morph equipped Zoa. But while Metalzoa's 3000 attack might seem like more than Zoa's 2600 plus 300 for Metal Morph, that doesn't take into account the battle effect of Metal Morph, which boosts its equipped monster's attack by half the attack of its target on battle declaration. And if that isn't bad enough, Metalzoa is also a completely dead draw since it can only be special summoned from the deck. But it's not the only Metal Morph monster. What about Red Eye's Black Metal Dragon, which is pretty much just Metalzoa with 200 less attack? Well, it's definitely not good either, but its materials, Red Eye's Black Dragon, is much easier to bring to the field than Zoa. Cards like the Black Sun of Legend, Red Eye's Insight, and Red Eye's Spirit can help you keep your Red Eyes fielded as a target for Metal Morph, support that Zoa simply does not have. For a long time, it would have been right to call Metalzoa and pals pretty much forgotten. But the OCG at last debuted retrains of these monsters in July of 2024, with cards like Fiend Beast Zoa, Metalzoa X, and Red Eye's Black Full Metal Dragon. But while these cards are cool, they don't make the original Metalmorph gang any better. Instead, their effects revolve around the Retrain Trap Enhanced Metalmorph. While the other new cards can search a generic Metalmorph trap, your target will more than likely be the enhanced one rather than the regular version. We mentioned the others, so we might as well mention Rare Metalmorph too, so named for the rare number scenarios where you'd actually bother using it. Anyways, the new metal cards and the old metal cards all take inspiration from Joey Wheeler's Duelist Kingdom quarterfinals match against Bandit Keith in episode 31 of the Duel Monsters anime. Since Keith's whole thing was using machine monsters that repelled spell effects, at first Joey reacted with confusion to Keith's Zoa, although the American champion soon made his plan clear by mechanifying his fiend into Metalzoa through the power of Metal Morph. Although the resulting mechanical monstrosity would crush Wheeler's Flame Swordsman, Joey's Trap Hole of Spikes would clear it from the field because being immune to spells doesn't save you from battle traps. Later in the duel, Joey would mimic Keith's strategy, using Copycat to upgrade his own monster with Metalmorph to summon Red Eye's Black Metal Dragon, which would take him home to victory. There are a lot of bad level 8s that range from situational useful to nearly useless, and Metalzoa lands at the top of the latter category. When you tribute for Great Moth, at least you're sacrificing one monster for an even better one. Metalzoa can't even say that, since a Metalmorphed Zoa is much stronger. And the only thing keeping Red Eye's Black Metal Dragon out of the number 1 or 2 spot is just that Metalzoa is marginally harder to use, and that it would be boring to talk about Red Eye's Black Metal Dragon and Metalzoa in consecutive entries. Alright, and that's the list. If you have thoughts on other bad level 8s I might have missed, or have ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to write them down in the comments.